Welcome to Intuitive Transformations with your host, Sylvia Henderson, and discover tools, wisdom, and inspiration that will empower you to transform your life. Sylvia is an intuitive life coach and energy healer with a growing practice that is focused on empowering others to be more of who they want to be. For the next hour, join Sylvia and explore and unravel anything in the way of you creating the life that you would love to live on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Intuitive Transformations radio show on OMTimes Radio, the voice of consciousness, where you will find tools you can use to transform your life. I'm Sylvia Henderson, your host, and I am here every Sunday evening at 6 p.m. Pacific Time and 9 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on iom.fm in your internet browser. Intuitive Transformations Radio is all about creating connections soul to soul and sharing valuable information and resources that will inspire you to expand into more of who you truly are so that you can step boldly into more of what you love and desire to experience in your life. If you enjoy today's show, then please share it with others and help me get the word out there that there are positive and uplifting conversations happening right here every Sunday evening that inspire, support, and enlighten. The podcast version of today's live show, isn't that great when it's a live show and your host can stumble over her tongue? I just want to let you know that today's live show will be available on podcast tomorrow on OMTimes.com. Just select the radio tab, archive shows, and Intuitive Transformations. You can tweet about the show, and please be sure to like my Facebook page too. You'll find all the necessary internet links at the bottom of today's show description page, which is located on OMTimes.com. And while you're on OMTimes.com's website, please be sure to take a look at this week's edition of OMTimes magazine with Deva Premal and Metin on the cover that just became available today. If you'd like to have OMTimes magazine come directly to your email inbox, then be sure to sign up for your free online subscription right after the show. If you would like to learn more about me, then please visit my website at intuitivetransformations.net. That's just like the name of the radio show, intuitivetransformations.net, and take advantage of a complimentary 15-minute phone session that will allow you to identify, release, and let go of the primary blockages that are holding you back in your life. This 15-minute phone session is my gift to you. Being an intuitive listener, it's a way of saying thank you. It's absolutely free. There are no strings attached. That's a 15-minute change and transformation session for free. So to take advantage of this absolutely free offer, just visit intuitivetransformations.net and you can book your complimentary session online after the show. Every time we talk about an event in our life, we create an experience of it. And in our own minds and in the minds of those who we share our story with, we actually make it real. I mean, did you know that? We can experience something negative, what we perceive to be negative, I should say, or what we perceive to be positive. And by sharing the story of it, that's when we begin to give it the coloring that goes beyond the actual experience that even occurred. So what we're really doing is just sharing our perceptions about something that has occurred in our life. It's interesting that for the most part, happy and successful people tend to have happy and successful stories about who they are and their life experience. So what if, for the most part, you are not so happy or not feeling very successful? What if you've experienced obstacles, roadblocks, detours, and challenges that have made you feel that happiness and success are hard to achieve and possibly even out of your reach? What if it's the stories that we create about our life experiences that determines the quality of our lives and our future experiences? For years, therapists have taught the benefit of writing and journaling about the events we experience in our lives in order to gain clarity and insight and even release stuck, painful emotions. But what if how we write and journal can create wholeness, acceptance, and even create a better life? What if using well thought out writing exercises could literally transform and recreate our reality and allow us to step out of being the underdog of our life story and step into being the victor, the hero that we would truly like to be? Well, today, I have psychotherapist Kim Schneiderman joining me to talk about her new book, Step Out of Your Story, Writing Exercises to Reframe and Transform Your Life. Kim is a workshop facilitator and spiritual essayist who lives and works in New York City. Kim writes for Psychology Today and writes an advice column for the New York, Boston, and Philadelphia Metro daily newspapers. And she has helped many of her clients with her novel approach of using traditional writing methods and character development. Kim teaches others how to deconstruct and reconstruct the personal narratives of their lives and enables them to exchange new empowering scripts for their old stories of defeat and frustration. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Kim Schneiderman to the show. Hello, Kim, and welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I am so happy to have you here. I think that this is such a good time to have a book of this nature be available for people to access, because right now with the challenges that a lot of people have, it's very easy to create stories about our events that can either elevate us or make us feel like we're plummeting in a free fall.
Absolutely.
So, Kim, your book, Step Out of Your Story, Writing Exercises to Reframe and Transform Your Life, was published by New World Library, which is the same publishing house that also publishes all of Eckhart Tolle's books. Mm-hmm. And it was just released in June of 15th. So this must be really exciting for you.
Yes, absolutely.
What a great story for you to write. So, Step Out of Your Story is such a great title. And I think that most of those listening to this show are familiar with hearing the phrase, step out of your story. But what is the main message that you want people to know and understand about your book?
Sure. So every life is an unfolding story, a unique and dynamic, unpredictable and potentially heroic story that's open to interpretation, especially your own. And a lot of what people, when I say that, they kind of nod their heads. It's as if we all kind of intuitively understand that. But until something happens that really challenges the way that we look at life, few of us take the time to really step out of our story and ask ourselves, who is this character I'm playing? What's my story about? Who's writing my script? And how can the challenges facing me help me develop the insights I need to grow as a character in my story and to develop the tools and insights I need to move to the next chapter of my life.
I liked how you pointed out a lot of people don't even ask the question, who is this character that I am playing? How huge is that in terms of empowering someone to really be able to look at themselves as a character in something that they may themselves be scripting?
Sure. I mean, I developed these writing exercises in 2008 around the time of the recession when a lot of people had, especially in New York City, lost their jobs and really had identified with those jobs, that was the role that they were playing was who they were. And they felt very sort of lost and aimless without that job title that defined them. And so one of the purposes of of creating these exercises was to help them see that they're not the roles they play. Their characters they're playing a role, but that role doesn't encompass all of who they are, and to help them see that there's a much larger narrative arc to their lives. People often confuse, when people become depressed, when they confuse the character they're playing for who they are.
I totally agree with you. And I like how you definitely point out that we are playing a role. It's not the whole of who we are. We have these moments in time that seem to be so pivotal that we use them to define our entire existence. And being able to use your writing exercises, it allows you to step out of that.
Absolutely. I mean, our roles are also changing all the time. And so that's one of the, if we can see the fact that each of these roles is challenging us to cultivate different aspects of ourselves and develop in new ways, then we can it's easier to navigate these transitions.
Yeah. I agree. I think that that's brilliant. We're going to be going into a break in just a moment. I just want to remind everyone that I have Kim Schneiderman here, and we are talking about her new book, Step Out of Your Story, Writing Exercises to Reframe and Transform Your Life. And you're going to want to stay tuned as we go into our break. This is Sylvia Henderson, and you are listening to Intuitive Transformations Radio on the OMTimes network. That is iom.fm in your internet browser, and the music will be coming in right now, so please stay tuned. It's just going to be a few minutes. There is so much more to come. You do not want to miss this. Call your friends, send an email to them, tell them to tune in and listen. This may be the show that will change their lives.
Your conscious connection to a more mindful world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
The truth is, you can't change the world if you're broke. I know, I tried. Isn't it time you turned your life's calling into a profitable, freedom-based business? I'm Michelle Barr. Join me every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern for Sacred Success.
Dr. Kevin here, and I want to invite you every Thursday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, to join me on the Dr. Kevin Show, where we have a diversity of guests who help you step outside the box, behind the curtain, and see what a load of crap is going on in the world today, so you have more information with which to make better decisions. We'll see you there. Namaste.
The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is. Free your mind with OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Sylvia Henderson on Intuitive Transformations Radio on OMTimes.com. I have with me Kim Schneiderman. We're talking about her book, Step Out of Your Story, Writing Exercises to Reframe and Transform Your Life. And before we went into the break, Kim was just sharing a little bit about how we tend to so identify with the roles we are playing as if that's the whole of who we are, and how back in 2008 is when she began to develop these powerful techniques that she shares in her book to help people as we were going through that difficult recession time and many people were being laid off. And so, Kim, as I read through your book, the thing that really struck me was just what a parallel many of the character development personality profiles that you listed were very similar to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Am I off base on that, or is that pretty similar?
No, they're similar. I mean, they're both different. They're both about, I use the elements of the story that many people learn in high school as sort of an architecture to deconstruct and reconstruct your story. So one of the aspects of the elements is that there's a protagonist trying to accomplish something, an antagonist that gets in the way, and that friction between the two creates the momentum that propels the protagonist forward to overcome obstacles, and then, and eventually it leads to a climax, and then there's this resolution. So it's similar to Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero, departing from his familiar surroundings and then being challenged in some way and receiving assistance. And then ultimately there's a conflict and he or she slays the dragon and returns home. So there definitely are similarities. And it is, very much I like to describe my book as a character development workout for people who like to write. So there's a certain aspect of, all of Joseph Campbell's work is really about that character development. It's really being able to see how the challenges that confront the hero force him or her to marshal all of those, to marshal all of the resources that they have at their disposal, to seek assistance, and to basically to go deep inside to find their inner resources, that inner strength or those insights that help really transform their character. And so I'm just using a more universally recognized framework for people, because a lot of people learn this, the elements in the story when they're in school, that every story has these particular elements. You remember your teacher drawing the curve on the chalkboard where there's an exposition at the beginning where all the characters are introduced and the setting is presented. And then there's a crisis that, then the status quo is challenged with a crisis. And then the conflict, develops between the protagonist and the antagonist, and it builds to a head at the climax, and then it resolves. So it's, yes. So it's very similar, but it's just a little bit, the elements are a little bit different.
Well, one of the things I find very similar, especially in the examples that you use in your book when you use this process with clients, and I just want to clarify, because you just kind of briefly mentioned that you did write this book for people who like to write, but these techniques are also for people who want to do some self-discovery. Isn't that correct?
Oh, absolutely. This is not about writing. This is not a book designed to help people, become good writers. It really is using writing as a tool for self-discovery.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure that that everybody understood that. And then also, one of the things that I always find very novel about Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey is that the hero, who is the protagonist, is always reluctant. And I think that is pretty consistent also within your book, because these are the stories that we create around events that we don't really want to experience, right?
It's so true. And well, the thing is, what I like to talk about, I like to liken the antagonist of your story as the person or situation that's pushing you to stretch and grow in a particular way. And oftentimes, I liken actually the antagonist of your story to your personal trainer. And oftentimes in life, people kind of understand, maybe because it's so tangible, that going to the gym is going to make them stronger. If they work out if they use their muscles in a particular way and make the effort, they're going to get stronger. But we don't always, when it comes to dealing with some of the more difficult, maybe emotional challenges, we often would prefer those low impact routines. And oftentimes, especially being a therapist, people will come to me and they'll be like, why do I have to deal with this? And it's kind of it's challenging you to grow in some way, because if you knew what to do with this, then it wouldn't be a challenge. So obviously there's something to be learned.
Go ahead.
Sure. No, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that you're really letting the cat out of the bag. There is no one in life that does not have challenges. And I think that sometimes what people perceive is that they are the only victim on the planet. Only bad things happen to them. Everybody else's life is cherry pie and ice cream. And that's not the case. Everybody, no matter your social economic situation, your race, your gender, your religious preference, your sexual preference, everyone, if you are inhaling and exhaling, you're going to have this journey experience, right?
Absolutely. And the people that are usually doing a lot better with it are the ones who have better attitudes. So you're not seeing so much. They're the ones who are actually doing a lot of this work that I prescribe in my book naturally. They're understanding that the challenges that show up in your life are, the antagonists of your story are kind of like your personal trainer that's pushing you to develop those underutilized emotional muscles. So they're reframing experiences that challenge them as challenges, and not instead of getting into the victim story.
And that's so important. And so one of the things you have in your book is you've got a very predictable framework or structure once you well, first of all, let's go back to just some of the techniques of looking at your story in the third person.
Right.
I thought that was huge.
Well, thank you. So it's actually based on a growing body of psychological research that shows that when we think about ourselves in the third person, we tend, or we recall past events in the third person, that we tend to view ourselves much more compassionately than when we talk about ourselves or view past events in the first person. And the reason, I think, is that it creates an emotional distance from our problem that allows us to look at it a lot more objectively. And so interesting in the research, they showed that students who had been bullied as children, when they look back on those memories, they, in the third person, they saw themselves as sort of being heroic and overcoming these obstacles and how they grew through the experience, as opposed to people that were telling the story in the first person who had been bullied, and they tended to see themselves more as they told the story with more of a victim scenario. So it's kind of, I like to call it the sneaky perspective in terms of the work that I'm doing, because what you're doing is you're sort of fooling your censoring ego into thinking that, because the first person, whenever we write about ourselves as an I or a me, we're very protective of what comes after that, because it's this identifies us, and there's a lot of emotional attachment to that. So what you're doing when you're writing about yourself in the third person is you're fooling the censoring ego into thinking that you're writing about somebody else's, but you're actually writing about yourself. Yeah. So it's just a little technique that helps you literally step out of your story and look at yourself as sort of this. If you could imagine that you're I'm just going to, sitting up on a cloud, or looking at yourself navigating the terrain of your life. Or if you could imagine yourself, you're opening a book and you're reading about this character in the story, and that's you. That's what I'm trying to create by using the third person.
I love it because I'm a hypnotherapist and I use NLP. And so we use that to help disassociate our clients from a very traumatic event, because if they can see it as if it's happening on a movie screen versus them being right in the middle of the experience, it empowers them to create more change. And I think that that's what you're saying here as well.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, kind of it's interesting. We all we're a culture that loves going to the movies. And when we go to the movies, we kind of expect that the hero of whatever story that we're watching, and especially in those movies that have really good character development, the hero is going to be challenged, or the hero or the protagonist, the star of the story, is going to be challenged in some way. And we expect it. And then we root for that, we root for the change that we hope will happen. And if that change happens, or if and when that change happens, we get so excited and we feel really gratified. It's so hard to have that distance when it comes to our own story. It can be so difficult because we have so much emotional attachment to it. So yes, that's kind of the same idea, is to be able to create that a distance. And then, as I say in the preface of my book, when I was a little girl, I used to imagine that I was a character in a story. And as I matured, this sort of mentality followed me. And when I would get into situations that were really tough, and even today, I would ask myself, like, if I were reading about this in a novel, what would I hope the main character would do? What actions would I root for? And what might this be teaching me? How might this be challenging me to grow and evolve beyond who I expect myself to be, who I think I am or what I think I'm capable of. So that perspective, is the goal of writing in the third person.
Yeah, it's very powerful, because even in writing about something that someone would consider to be an adverse experience, it's also, I would think, very helpful in trying to create and imagine something more positive, because if someone's had a long history of believing that they tend to have things happen to them more negatively than positively, it would be easier from the third person to be able to imagine, to create a story of a brighter outcome, right?
Yes, absolutely. It gives them that emotional distance so that they can start to see that there are more opportunities than maybe they imagined. There are more possibilities, and they can actually become a lot more curious about their story. Instead of saying, oh my God, what am I going to do? Think to yourself, like, give yourself a sense of curiosity, a sense of venture. Gee, I wonder what's going to happen next. That idea, that suspense. What would a character do? Will she, can I imagine her doing X, Y, and Z? And maybe if she did this, and all of a sudden it's like, well, if that character's like myself, maybe I can also do that as well.
I think that's great. I mean, I always tell my clients, as soon as you conclude something is true, you've created. You've made it solid. So we're going into another break, everyone. You are listening to Intuitive Transformations on OMTimes Radio. We will be back in just a few moments. Please stay tuned. You're going to want to hear more about how to step out of your story.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Imagine receiving healing, vibration-raising energy as you listen to the radio. Energy that flows effortlessly to you. Imagine exploring all things metaphysical, sharing in an ongoing adventure. Join me, Karen Smoot, along with my co-hosts Lisa Victorson and Wendy Weber for Immersion into Source, every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on OM Radio.
Hello, I'm Miriam Knight of New Consciousness Review, inviting you to my new show where I interview the rising stars of the conscious awakening. We'll explore the many faces of consciousness in action and intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us each Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Rising Stars Show.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle. Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Sylvia Henderson on the Intuitive Transformations radio show here with Kim Schneiderman, and we are talking about her new book, Step Out of Your Story, Writing Exercises to Reframe and Transform Your Life. Before we went into the break, Kim and I were talking about the importance of writing your story from a third person point of view, and how that really does empower you to step out of it and get some different perspective and a different point of view about what is actually happening and going on in your life. And one of the other things, Kim, that I noticed in your book that you brought to light that I thought was really relevant, and that was that there's an inner story and that there is an outer story. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the outer story is kind of what happens to you, the newscaster version of events. So, like, for example, let's say you bumped into your friend on the street and they say, oh, I haven't, that you haven't seen in a while. And they say, what have you been up to? And you give them a sound bite of or whatever. No, the sound bite's not the right word, but you go into, well, I was on vacation and then I went, and then yesterday my daughter did this, or, and you start explaining what you've been doing, but there's no experience. There's no explanation of any of what of emotional experience that went into any of these events. So the internal story is, that's the outer story. The internal story is your experience of something. So, for example, and I often use this, I talk about I was earlier before we went to commercial, I was talking about how we all how my book makes use of everyone has an antagonist of their story. And in my book, I talk about how the antagonist of your story can be anything good or bad that stretches you. And I give an example of this book, for example. So for the past 2 years, the book was sort of the antagonist of my story, because it stretched me to develop more discipline and grow into the type of character who could write a book. So when people ask me what have I been up to, and I tell them, I wrote a book, it doesn't explain, that's the outer story. But the inner story is that it really pushed me in a lot of ways. That were lots of ups and downs. There were times that I didn't think that I was actually going to finish. There were times that I really doubted whether it would get published. So there was all of that stuff that was going on internally that just by telling you that I wrote a book doesn't really get into. And oftentimes people will, it's the emotional experience of something. So a lot of times people don't, when they focus too much on the outer story of things, they don't value all of the growth that takes place under the surface. And that growth is so important. And that sometimes I talk about how we can't always control our story, right? Things happen. Our life is an unfolding story. Things happen that are way beyond anything that we can control.
Absolutely.
But we can always take charge of the narration of our story and mine our story for meaning. And that is very much an internal experience. So if you look at something that's challenging and you say to yourself on the outside, you might name a number of different events with divorce or unemployment or loss or illness. These things are things that people would say are negative events. They're in a negative, the negative, newscast of your story. But underneath all of these things, we might be still able to grow, to recognize the ways that we're being challenged to grow. And I can give you kind of an example from my own life. So after developing these writing exercises, which was all about changing your story, change your story, change your life. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the same idea. Change your internal story, changes your external story. How you tell your story affects how it unfolds, and blah, blah, blah. And my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer 7 years after my mother had died of cancer. And he had been sort of the childhood antagonist of my story. Mm. And we had gotten a lot closer after my dad died. And after my mom died.
Yeah.
Yeah, after my mom died, yeah. We had gotten a lot closer. And it was, really kind of like, and I still like, I'm middle-aged and I hadn't been married. And the idea that my dad was now facing terminal cancer was like the last thing that I ever wanted to happen now that we had kind of redeveloped our relationship. And so I actually he was down in Florida, and I had to take a temporary leave of absence from my private practice in New York City and go down and take care of him. And during those last couple of months that we spent together, it was one of the hardest and most challenging things I've ever done. But there was also like incredible deep healing that, transpired in our relationship, to the point that at the end of his life, he was saying, I can't believe that despite all this pain and despite how difficult this is, that I'm still learning and growing. And I said to him, what are you learning? And he said, that people have found a way to love me, and I found a way to love them.
Oh,
and it was something that really stayed with me. And so when I look back at that time in my life, I could focus on the outer story, which would be that, this was a horrible thing that happened, that I became a middle-aged orphan, that I had to give up my practice and take care of the second parent who had cancer, and how difficult that was. And it was very difficult. But I really choose internally, what happened for me as the character of my story is that I was transformed in my capacity to love, and that I healed my relationship with my father. And that instead of, I really choose to, instead of reading that story as a tragedy, I really read it as a story of love and redemption. The prodigal daughter, perhaps. So that's kind of the difference. Like, it's sometimes the things that happen to us are not the things that we might choose. And I don't know that I would have chosen this story for my particular lessons in life. However, I can choose to look at this as an opportunity, to look at that story as I did, even in the moment while it was happening,
right,
as a way to find the silver lining narrative by using it to grow and evolve beyond beyond what I thought I needed to be a thriving, beyond who I really knew that I could be. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes absolute sense, because I totally get that inner story versus outer story. There's the whole headline part that looks like it's, like you said, very overwhelming, very devastating, but yet it was it was what allowed that inner growth. But you had to choose. You have to make a choice with your inner story. I mean, I don't know if everyone listening knows that I have 2 sons with autism, and I have to say, when I resisted that, when I just pushed so hard against it, no, I don't want this, instead of allowing it to just move through me as a character, so to speak. So much growth and compassion came from that. I would not be who I am today if it were not for my 2 sons being diagnosed with autism.
Absolutely. Right. And that compassion, and that's one of the things I really focus on in my book, is having people identify their character arc. We all have a particular way that we evolve through the course of our lifetime, and some events give us opportunities to become more courageous, or to become more compassionate, or to become more honest or more authentic. And if we can look at whatever these challenges are as a way to expand ourselves, to open our hearts and open our minds and become more of and to deepen our experience of life, we can really be transformed by these experiences, and also transform others in the way we respond to them, which I'm sure you've inspired many people to do, especially being on this radio show.
Well, I certainly hope so. And I think, and as I said, I think this book is very timely right now, because in today's society, people do not want to deal with their inner story. They look at their headlines and they go, oh, let's just turn that off and distract and do something to look in another direction, instead of realizing that, again, if you're inhaling and exhaling, this is everyone's journey, is to have that time to choose to see what that inner story has to teach you, because honestly, if you do not allow the lessons to move through you and to be open to allowing them to be present and be present with them and use exercises such as the ones that you have in your book, they're just going to keep coming back.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes it's like this, if anyone's ever noticed that having the same recurring character in their story that shows up in different guises.
Yeah.
And the reason you're like, it's that authoritarian figure that never recognizes my contributions, and maybe that reminds me of my father, and now it's, now it's my boss, or now it's my husband, and that person that always wants to tell me what to do and doesn't listen to me. And oftentimes it's because there's something to be learned. Maybe we need to become more assertive. Maybe we need to walk away, whatever it is. And, I'm using the word exercises because we all have these internal emotional muscles that are sometimes are underdeveloped. And we need, that's what life is. It's it challenges us. It's like that personal growth workout. When these things, that challenge us to keep using these emotional muscles so they can get stronger and stronger. And the more that they get stronger, the more emotional heavy lifting that we can do. And the more that we can hold in our life, the freer we are from internal strife. Mm-hmm. And the freer we are from internal strife, the more that we can share our gifts with others and the world.
I agree. And here's the other thing. I really do believe that no one wants to be stuck in their story. No one wants to make it their sense of identity when they feel challenged. And that's why I so think that writing in the third person so brilliant, because that gives people an exit strategy. Because people are being told, step out of your story. Well, how? How do I do that? Get this book. This book will help you. It's got some great ideas and concepts and exercises for you to do. And, you might get through the first half of the book, and that might be exactly what you needed to get you into a different direction from where you are, to get you out of the stuckness that you might be experiencing. So we are going to go into another break. I can't believe how quickly this time is passing, Kim. This is so much fun. But we will return, and we're going to continue this fantastic conversation about how you can step out of your story with Kim Schneiderman. And please stay tuned, because you don't want to miss the last part of this. It's just going to keep getting better, everyone. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Imagine receiving healing, vibration-raising energy as you listen to the radio. Energy that flows effortlessly to you. Imagine exploring all things metaphysical, sharing in an ongoing adventure. Join me, Karen Smoot, along with my co-hosts Lisa Victorson and Wendy Weber for Immersion into Source every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on OM Radio.
Have you bought into the idea that you have to work hard for your money, that business is hard? I will share some dynamic access consciousness tools to get you out of your own way so you can create a business that actually succeeds. Join me, Simone Millisers, on The Joy of Business at 4 p.m. Mondays Eastern.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle. The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Welcome back. This is Sylvia Henderson talking with Kim Schneiderman about her new book, Step Out of Your Story, Writing Exercises to Reframe and Transform Your Life. And this has been such a fantastic conversation. Kim, I was wondering, would you mind sharing with those who are listening how they can get in contact with you and also share any information you have on any upcoming events that are on the horizon here?
Sure. So they can go to my website, stepoutofyourstory.com, and you can actually register for my mailing list. You can also find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook page, Step Out of Your Story. And I am going to be doing a Step Out of Your Story writing workshop at the JCC in Manhattan on Sunday, October 25th. And you can actually register that. There's a link actually to register via my website. And I will be doing a book signing in Miami on November 8th. And there's also information about that on my website.
Oh, wonderful. So all of you folks over in the Miami, Florida area or in Manhattan, please make sure you visit Kim's website and take advantage of learning from her exactly how to use these techniques firsthand, one-on-one. I think that's a fantastic opportunity for everyone. There is one thing I wanted to share from your book, and then Kim, I want you to talk a little bit about a story that we all know and love, which is The Wizard of Oz. But there's one thing I just wanted to share that you have on page 21 right at the top, and you say, we might even say that suffering can sometimes partly be due to a storytelling deficit, a failure to find a good filing system that organizes the details of one's life into a meaningful cause and effect narrative, which results in an incoherent or distorted story. And this is what happens when we haven't learned how to effectively spin the events, is how you like to coin the phrase. And so I want you to share about The Wizard of Oz as an example of how people can use that as a framework to help spin the experience of their own personal lives.
Sure. First of all, I wanted to say, just to kind of further expand the quote that I had in the book, that how you tell your story affects how you feel about your story, which can influence how it unfolds.
And how you feel about yourself, too, right?
Right. Exactly. That's the whole thing. Like how we feel about it, how we tell it affects how we feel about it. And that energy that is created when we tell a story, especially to ourselves, influences how we interact with the world. So it can be, if you tell a more positive, if you can find that positive spin on your story, there's more likely that it's going to be you're going to create more positive energy. And likewise, if you get stuck in that victim story, you're going to be putting out that kind of energy. So, and again, some people say, well, aren't you being a little Pollyannish? And it's really not about that, because if you see my book is about seeing your life as a personal growth adventure. Mm. And personal growth adventure values those experiences that challenge us and are difficult as things that potentially can transform us. I'm using The Wizard of Oz as an example of that. You know, we could read the story of The Wizard of Oz as a story of a waste of time in some ways. Like, here is this, a tragic waste of time. Like, here's this girl who doesn't appreciate what she has, and she's always dreaming of another place. And then her neighbor takes her dog, and she runs away, and she gets hit in the head, and she ends up killing a witch, and then she's chased by her sister, and she's, her friends are threatened, and her life is threatened, and she goes through all of these challenges, and in the end, from the very beginning, she had the power to go back, by herself. She didn't need to go through all of this stuff. And then she ends up back in the same place. So some people really tell their stories that way, that like, why did I have to go through all of this? I just and they beat themselves up about it. Whereas I think we all understand that The Wizard of Oz is about something much, much deeper. That it's about how she really had to go on this journey to come to really appreciate the power of friendship, the power of love, to find her own strength, to figure out what really, really mattered to her. Mm-hmm. And it was through all these trials and tribulations that she came to sort of appreciate what was really important in her life and to know what she was really made of and what mattered to her. And so we have to sometimes go through these experiences, and if we can tell ourselves a story that incorporates these things, that challenges us in, sort of that heroic narrative of how, or that way, maybe not even heroic, but just how we, as a story of personal transformation, and then we start to value how we've grown, and that can in itself change our story.
And I love how you use the Wizard of Oz, because when I think of Dorothy and how she stayed in a state of curiosity really throughout the entire journey. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were times when she had interactions with the witch and it was like, oh no, Toto. But honestly, it was a curious thing for her. It was this sense of unfolding of, oh wow, what is that? And what's the next step? And when we can look at our life that way, how much more liberating and freeing is that?
Absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, yes, it was, and again, like Linda says to her, like at the end, when she discovers she had the power to, go home, she says, well, why didn't you tell me? And she said, you had to discover this for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
So if we can look at our lives that way, then maybe sometimes the things that challenges us are ways of that there's value in our learning more about ourselves, and our learning more about life, and who we are and what we appreciate.
Right. One of the other things that you talk about in your book as a technique, and it really doesn't matter where people are in life or what they have experienced, is you really focus on the importance of looking at this process just one chapter at a time.
Right.
Versus trying to eat the entire elephant of your life.
No, absolutely. And one of the first exercises actually is to describe imagine that your life is a story, and describe it. Describe the current chapter. Write it like basically a chapter summary, and assign a title to it. And what that does, it sort of bookmarks. It bookends a period of time in your life from which to explore, because really, the current moment is the time that the protagonist of your story is being asked to grow, and the time when change is possible.
And why is it so important that people write the story versus reading the book and doing it all in their head?
Well, I mean, there's something that I think the process of writing, it makes it, first of all, it's a creative process, and oftentimes it opens us up in a way that and liberates. Writing itself liberates us and helps us see things in ways that we might not be able to do just by thinking about it in our minds. We might spin the same wheels over and over again, but when we actually see it on paper, we can see our stories much more clearly.
Gotcha. And so another question I have is, let's say that the reality for someone has been a lifetime of maybe they were emotionally abused as a child, and so then they're replicating this because they've learned this story very early in childhood as to what they believe their life existence is, or how life looks to them, or they feel very challenged feeling safe, or maybe they don't feel heard or seen or invisible. Is your book a good first step for someone who's trying to figure themselves out?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's a journey of self-discovery. And one of the things that I have people do is when they identify the antagonist is look at the vulnerabilities that are being exposed. Like, what are those places, those delicate, those tender places that come up when we're challenged? Like, it's really not about delving into the past, but it's only relevant. Like, let's say you're in a relationship right now, and those previous experiences as a child are interfering with you in this relationship. So you would start by looking at what the vulnerabilities are being presented from this relationship, and then begin to explore how I use a lot of dialogues for people to access the different voices that are within themselves. Mm-hmm. So you might identify, like, maybe whenever you're challenged in a particular way, you tend to get very fearful. And so I would look at, like, what's that fear narrative, and help people use dialogues to talk back to fear. And then I'll have them also identify, like, well, if you're fearful, if your go-to emotion is fear, then how do you want to grow? Well, if you want to be more courageous, I have them identify the voice of courage and look at the types of actions and the thoughts that they might have that would create that kind of courageous stance that would help them grow through the experiences that they're going through.
That's fantastic.
Right. I mean, it's not meant to be a substitute for deep therapy. If somebody has been abused,
of course not.
I don't think that's really necessarily the point of the book. But I think for people that get stuck in the same old story over and over again and feel like victims, it's a great book to really change your story.
Fantastic. So we're coming to the end of our show. I can't believe the time has just gone so quickly. We only have a few moments left. Kim, is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with that you think would really help them, even though they may not have the book in front of them, which I'm going to encourage everyone, please go get this book. If you're having any areas of your life where it's sticky or you feel stuck, then this book would definitely help give you some movement in the right direction that you want to go. But is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners before we say goodbye?
Yeah, there's two things I'm going to get a chance to talk about. One of them, and I want to just clarify about the chapters. When people get depressed, it's also because they often confuse a difficult chapter in their life for the entire plot line. And I want people to understand that, like, if they can look at their life chapter by chapter and try to understand what the lesson of the current chapter, then they have an opportunity to really work through that and change. They can change that. They really have the power to change your story.
Love that.
Yes.
Awesome. I thought you had another one. I just wanted to make sure.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if we're going to have time to but one of the most powerful exercises in the book is I have people give themselves the blessing that they want to that they want to receive from their antagonists. That ultimately, when we have these challenges, we want people to validate our choices. But if we can give that blessing to ourselves, often then we feel like we're victorious regardless of what happens.
I love that. That's very powerful. Kim, thank you so much for joining me on the air here. It's been absolutely delightful. I hope that all of you listening have enjoyed the show. Make sure to download the podcast, share it with others. It's going to be in the OMTimes Radio Archive section tomorrow, Monday, and tune in next week for another great show. Diana Lang will be joining me we're going to talk about her book, Opening to Meditation. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.